A teacher followed his best student to his house. When he saw what they were doing to the boy, the teacher began to cry. In the vibrant classroom of the school, a youthful energy filled the air, with the chatter of students eager for the upcoming recess. Julian, the history teacher, known for his commitment to the well-being of his students, observed his best student, Matteo, amidst the organized chaos. The boy, once participative and cheerful, was now apathetic with a distant look in his eyes. Sitting at the back of the class, his dark eyes seemed lifeless, lost in faraway thoughts. It was a striking contrast to the usual enthusiasm that characterized him. Julian felt a pang in his heart seeing his brightest student so disconnected. It wasn't the first time he had seen an intelligent student get lost in that poor community. They often showed similar signs, and when that happened, Julian did everything he could to help his students continue studying. Julian hoped he was wrong, especially because Matteo was such an intelligent boy who loved to study. Is he getting into trouble outside of school, he wondered, his concern growing with each moment of Matteo's silence. As soon as the class ended, Julian discreetly called Matteo aside. "Matteo, you've been very quiet lately. Is everything okay with you?" Julian's voice was gentle but laden with palpable concern. Matteo looked up, meeting his teacher's eyes, and for a brief moment, Julian saw a spark of something he couldn't identify pass through them. "I'm fine, sir. I'm just a bit tired," Matteo replied, his voice so low it almost got lost in the noise of the other students leaving. Not convinced, Julian gave a sympathetic nod. However, his intuition told him there was more to the story. Determined to understand the situation better, he followed Matteo after school, keeping a careful distance. To his surprise, Matteo didn't follow his usual path. Instead, he entered an old semi-abandoned building, causing Julian's heart to race, fearing the boy was involved with illicit substances. However, walking discreetly to the place where the boy entered, the teacher felt tears streaming down his face at what he saw. Matteo was in front of a worn blackboard, writing down everything Julian had taught that day, and behind him a group of clearly underprivileged children were taking notes and watching the lesson with rare attention. The boy was teaching those who couldn't get a spot in the school to study, or perhaps children forbidden by their parents' ignorance to learn. The teacher felt pride filling his chest, while the tears wouldn't stop falling down his face. Hidden, he watched the entire lesson, surprised that the boy remembered every word he had said during the day, repeating and teaching them. Hidden in the shadow of a door, Julian observed the questions from Matteo's students, his heart tight from the scene. He's trying to make a difference, but why was he so sad in class? How can I help him? He pondered, admiring the boy's determination to pass on his knowledge. When Matteo finished the lesson and bid the children goodbye, he turned to go home. The student's steps to leave were slow, almost reluctant, as if he had difficulty leaving the abandoned house. Julian followed, keeping his distance. As they approached Matteo's house, the boy's pace slowed. Julian waited for the boy to enter the house. Why is he so nervous, he wondered, as he saw the boy enter his simple home with slumped shoulders of sadness. The teacher waited a few seconds until a disturbing sound broke the calm of the afternoon, screams coming from inside Matteo's residence. The teacher was startled by the sharp sound of the violent argument cutting through the air. Julian didn't hesitate, only pondering the best way to solve the problem and what to do. He needed to help the boy. Inside the house, the screams continued, growing more intense. The teacher heard the abusive words with astonishment. They were too harsh and abusive. "Matteo doesn't deserve this," he murmured to himself, the decision to intervene crystallizing in his mind as he took the first step toward Matteo's front door. As Julian approached the house, he felt his heart weigh a ton upon hearing the screams echoing down the quiet street. He took a deep breath, gathering courage, and knocked on the door with determination. "I need to intervene. I can't let this continue," he thought, feeling the weight of his responsibility. "Who is it?" The rough voice of a man, probably Matteo's father, sounded through the half-open door filled with irritation. "It's me, Julian, Matteo's teacher. We need to talk about the student situation. I heard the screams and I want to know if everything is okay here," Julian replied firmly, meeting Christopher's suspicious eyes as the door opened fully. "You must be Mr. Christopher, correct? The father of my student?" asked the teacher, recalling the father's name from the student's file. The man frowned, clearly unhappy with the visit. "Yes, that's me, but you have no business meddling in our lives, teacher. What happens in my house is my business," he retorted, his voice rising in anger. Julian, keeping calm, replied, "I care about Mateo's well-being, and it's hard to ignore when I see clear signs that something is wrong. He's a smart boy and shouldn't be subjected to this." His concern was evident, and he hoped his words would reach somewhere inside Christopher's heart. Christopher's response was a low growl. "Mind your own business, teacher, or you'll regret getting involved." The barely veiled threat made Julian shiver, but his determination didn't waver. Realizing the conversation wouldn't lead to a peaceful resolution and that he needed to protect Mateo, Julian ordered, "Don't hurt Mateo. I don't feel intimidated by threats," he said, bidding farewell with a nod. Then the teacher immediately headed to the nearest police station, hurried to help the boy. There he explained the entire situation, from Mateo's behavior at school to the screams he witnessed. "I hope we can do something before it's too late," he expressed to the officer, who took notes with a grave expression. Returning home that day, Julian reflected on everything that happened. "I made the right decision by not standing idly by, but at what cost? I hope Mateo is okay and that the police have done something about it," he thought, worried about possible reprisals from Christopher. The next day, as he prepared for school, a knot of anxiety formed in Julian's stomach. Upon arriving at school, he was greeted with alarming news. Mateo had not shown up for classes. What did Christopher do? Julian murmured to himself, fearing the worst. Determined to find Mateo, Julian began his search immediately. He visited the places Mateo frequented: the small library where the boy liked to read, the school park where he often saw him playing with friends, and even the student snack bar where Mateo used to buy sweets to eat at school. In each place, the answer was the same: no one had seen Mateo. Where to start now? Julian pondered, increasingly worried. The teacher decided to go to the abandoned building where he had seen Mateo teaching the community children, but the place was empty. Then, with determination, he went to the boy's house, fearing the father had locked him up at home, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. The house was empty. Without losing his determination, the teacher returned to school, continuing his search while walking through the school corridors, driven by a mix of determination and fear. Upon reaching the teacher's room, he saw the same worried look on his face in the eyes of the other teachers, who gave him the alarming news that Mateo was in trouble because he had not attended classes that day. "He never misses without warning. Something is very wrong," Julian murmured to himself, anxiety growing in his chest. With hope dwindling, Julian decided to speak to Mateo's friends, asking if anyone knew anything that could help. Mateo's friends, though equally worried, had no information about his whereabouts. One of them mentioned that Mateo seemed worried in recent days but didn't know the reason. "He was just worried, as if something worrisome was happening," revealed the friend, looking sadly at the floor. With no clues and feeling the weight of uncertainty, Julian returned to his classroom to check if Mateo had left any hint that could help. Searching through Mateo's notebooks, he looked for any note that mentioned a place or plan the boy might have considered a refuge. Maybe he wrote something in a project or an exercise, Julian thought, flipping through the pages quickly. Suddenly, Julian was interrupted by Severino, the school principal, who entered the room with a grave expression. "Julian, there's something I need to tell you. The father of one of your students, Mateo, was here this morning while you were teaching. He's withdrawing Mateo from school. He said you're interfering too much in their personal lives," explained Severino, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I ask you please not to get involved anymore, or I will have to take drastic measures against you. We should not get too involved in our students' lives," said the principal. However, Julian could see beyond his words. If he continued helping the boy, he would be fired. Shocked by the news, Julian felt a wave of anger and frustration. "Christopher can't just isolate Mateo from the world like that. I'll do whatever it takes to protect the boy. The principal should support me in helping Mateo, but I've seen him pretend not to see when a student had a problem at school. I need to solve this alone and, if possible, without losing my job," Julian thought, his voice firm despite the internal tremor. As soon as the principal left, the teacher was even more determined to resolve the situation, deciding to seek legal assistance to confront Mateo's father and protect the boy. "I'll schedule a meeting with Charles, my lawyer. We need a strategy to bring Mateo back and ensure his safety. The boy is clearly in an abusive home," he concluded, as he picked up the phone to make the most important call of his life. After asking his lawyer for help to resolve the situation, Julian felt each heartbeat as he prepared for a broader search for Mateo. He began by mobilizing a network of colleagues and acquaintances, explaining the urgent situation of the boy. "We need to find Mateo before it's too late," he explained in an impromptu meeting. The determined looks of his colleagues reflected the sense of urgency. Together, they divided the city into zones and began the search, knocking on doors, asking everyone if they had seen Mateo or knew of any place he might be. "Please think carefully. Any small detail can help us," Julian pleaded, his voice laden with concern. By the end of the day, Julian and his collaborators had covered numerous streets and talked to dozens of people, but there was no sign of Mateo. Discouragement began to set in, but Julian refused to give up. "We'll continue tomorrow. We can't stop now," he encouraged, even feeling the weight of exhaustion. As he was heading home, Julian's phone rang. It was a call from an unknown number. "Hello, who's speaking?" Julian answered, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. "Hi, Mr. Julian, I heard you're looking for Mateo. I think I know where he might be," said a hesitant voice on the other end of the line. "Please tell me where you think he is," Julian responded quickly, his heart racing with the possibility of finally finding Mateo. "He's in an old cabin at the end of the city's park trail. I've seen him going in there a few times," the voice revealed, now a bit more confident. Armed with this new information, Julian gathered a few close colleagues and headed to the park, even with the night falling. They walked along the trail, guided only by the faint light of their flashlights and renewed hope. As they approached the cabin described by the informant, Julian felt a mix of relief and fear. The cabin was in ruins, hidden among dense trees, a place he never imagined Mateo would choose to hide. "Mateo, are you there?" called Julian, his voice echoing in the quiet surroundings. There was no answer, just the sound of the wind in the leaves. Julian took a step towards the door, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear of what he might find inside. Julian slowly pushed the cabin door open, which creaked under his touch. The darkness inside was almost palpable, interrupted only by the faint light from the flashlight trembling in his hand. "Mateo?" he called again, his voice now an anxious whisper. From the back of the cabin, a faint groan responded. Julian advanced cautiously, the flashlight revealing the abandoned interior little by little. Finally, the beam of light fell on a small figure huddled in a corner. It was Mateo, visibly injured, with an arm wrapped in what looked like an improvised bandage. "Mr. Julian," Mateo murmured, his face illuminated by the light showing clear signs of suffering. "I knew you would find me," the boy said amid the pain. Julian knelt beside the boy, a mix of anger and concern filling his chest. "Who did this to you, Mateo?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "It was my father," Mateo confessed, averting his eyes. "He found out I was helping the other children, and you went to my house and he didn't like it," he said, his voice faltering. Julian felt his heart tighten. "We're going to get you out of here. I'll take care of these injuries and we'll make sure you don't have to go back to that situation," he promised, helping Mateo to his feet. With Mateo leaning on his shoulder, Julian left the cabin, determined to confront Christopher when he could. He took the boy to the emergency room where they treated his injuries. However, it wasn't long before the boy's father was alerted by the hospital. Christopher was furious, his face contorted with rage when he saw his son with Julian in the hospital. He didn't seem concerned about Mateo's health, only filled with a fury that was hard to contain. "What are you doing here? Are you trying to steal my son from me, teacher? Why are you meddling in my life?" Christopher shouted as he approached, attracting the attention of some people passing by the hospital. "I'm protecting Mateo, something you should be doing as a father," Julian retorted with equal intensity, standing in front of Mateo, who was lying on the hospital bed, protecting him behind him. "He's hurt and scared, Christopher. This is not how a father should treat his son." The people passing by the hallway began to stop at the door, forming a small circle to watch what was happening, murmuring and exchanging looks of shock. Christopher looked around, realizing the accusatory glances. "You'll pay dearly for this, Julian. That's a promise," Christopher threatened in a low voice, the words laden with a dark promise. Julian met his gaze, unwavering. "If it's to protect Mateo, I'll face whatever it takes. And now, with witnesses to your behavior, I think the law will have a say. I'll take the boy to my house and take care of him. I won't let you hurt him again," he said, ready to do anything to protect the child. With the situation heating up and the crowd around growing, Christopher backed down, casting one last venomous look at Julian and Matteo before turning and walking down the hospital corridors. Julian sighed, feeling both relief and the weight of the consequences to come. He looked at Matteo, whose grateful gaze said more than words could express. Together, as soon as Matteo was discharged by the doctors, they walked back to the city's light, ready to face whatever came next. Julian felt a mix of relief and anxiety as he and Matteo left the hospital. The decision to take Matteo to his own home was not easy, but seemed the only safe option at that moment. "Before we go home, we need to go somewhere, Matteo. We need help, not just legal, but also from the school administration," Julian explained to the boy as they drove back to his house. When they arrived at the school, Julian walked through the school corridors with Matteo by his side, each step filled with determination. They reached Principal Severino's office, where Julian hoped to find some support. "Severino, I need to discuss an urgent situation about Matteo. He was a victim of serious abuse by his own father. I know you asked me not to get involved, but I can't let the boy suffer at his father's hands. So I brought him to protect him and need your support," Julian began, presenting a brief summary of everything that happened, while Matteo sat silently beside him. The principal listened attentively, but his expression was one of concern. "Julian, I understand your concern and commend your commitment, but the school cannot get directly involved in family disputes of this nature. We can't offer the kind of support you're asking for," Severino replied, crossing his arms over his chest. Julian felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Severino, we're talking about a boy who was clearly hurt. How can we turn a blind eye to this? It's not just a dispute, it's a matter of student safety," he insisted, trying to contain the irritation in his voice. "I understand, but there are limits to what we can do. My recommendation is that you seek external legal assistance," Severino suggested, indicating that the conversation had reached its end. Julian left the office, disappointed but not defeated, determined to take the next steps on his own. Already in the car on the way to his lawyer Charles's office, Julian explained the situation to Matteo, ensuring that he would understand the process. "We will do everything in our power to ensure you are safe, Matteo. You trust me, don't you?" Julian asked, seeking some comfort in the boy's eyes. Matteo nodded, his expression still laden with fear from recent events, but there was a spark of hope. "I trust you, sir. Thank you for taking care of me," he murmured, gratitude evident in his fragile voice. Upon arriving at Charles's office, Julian presented a complete dossier of the evidence he had collected, including photos of Matteo's injuries and detailed accounts of the incidents. Charles, with his usual serious expression, analyzed the documents attentively. "Julian, this is serious. We will prepare a petition for emergency custody and a restraining order against the father. You're doing the right thing. I hope you can gain custody of the boy," Charles affirmed, starting to type rapidly on the computer. While Charles worked on the legal documents, Julian sat next to Matteo, holding his hand in a supportive gesture. The fight would be long and full of legal challenges, but he was ready to face whatever was necessary to protect Matteo. With the documents prepared, Charles looked at Julian and Matteo. "We will submit this to the court as soon as possible. I will be by your side every step of the way. Don't worry about taking the boy to your house. The evidence of the injuries will convince the jury that you did the best thing since the police did nothing to help the boy," he declared, handing a copy of the documents to Julian. As they left the office at dusk, Julian felt a mixture of worry and determination. He knew the coming weeks would be crucial and perhaps difficult, but he also knew he was not alone. With Matteo by his side and a competent lawyer like Charles, he had a chance to change the boy's fate for the better. Together they were ready to face whatever came, armed with truth and justice. At home, Julian took care of the boy with great care, including tending to his injuries. Matteo seemed touched by the care he received, as if no one had ever done that for him. Matteo shared that his mother died in childbirth, and that his father had never done anything for him, and that he was used to taking care of himself despite being too young for it. With everything the boy said, Julian felt even more determined to obtain custody of the boy as a duty, to help the small child who had suffered so much at such a young age. The teacher knew that, even though it would not be an easy path, he would find a way to take care of Matteo so that the boy would never feel alone again. Weeks after initiating the legal process for Matteo's custody, Julian found himself in court, awaiting the start of the first hearing. The corridor was filled with tense echoes of hushed conversations. Matteo, sitting beside him, held Julian's hand firmly, his large eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and fear. "Everything is ready, Julian," said Charles, approaching with a folder full of documents. "The argument is solid, and we have enough evidence to show that the environment with his father is not suitable for Matteo," said the lawyer professionally. Julian nodded, his expression one of determination. "I'm ready. No matter what happens, we need to ensure that Matteo is in a safe place," he affirmed, looking at the boy beside him, who tried to muster a brave smile. As the hearing began, Christopher's lawyer, a man with an aggressive posture and rapid speech, started to challenge Julian's action. "My client is the biological father and has every right to maintain custody of his son. Mr. Julian's allegations are exaggerated and not based on a complete understanding of the family situation," argued the opposing lawyer, casting a disdainful glance in Julian's direction. Charles, calm and focused, presented photos of Matteo's injuries, medical reports, and testimonies from neighbors who had heard the frequent violent arguments. "Matteo's safety is at risk. This is not just a family dispute, it is a matter of child protection," he retorted, his firm voice resonating in the ensuing silence. The judge, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, listened attentively, making occasional notes. After the presentations, he called Matteo to speak. With a trembling but clear voice, Matteo shared his experience. "I just want to be in a place where I can feel safe. Mr. Julian helped me when I needed it most and took care of me," said Matteo, looking at Julian with gratitude. After a long debate and several exchanges of legal accusations, the judge finally retired to deliberate. The tension in the air was almost tangible as everyone awaited the decision. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge returned, ready to announce his decision. "Considering the evidence presented and the minor's testimony, I have decided that Matteo will temporarily remain under state custody in a shelter until a final decision is made. This will provide a neutral and safe environment while we further evaluate this situation," the judge declared. The decision was a blow to Julian, who had hoped to take Matteo home. He could not let the boy suffer even more by going into state custody. The small boy had already suffered so much. Despite this, he knew it was a necessary step to eventually ensure the boy's complete safety. "We will keep fighting, Matteo. You will have to go with them. But know that I will do everything I can to help and take care of you. I won't give up," Julian whispered to the boy, whose eyes were filled with tears. Christopher left the courtroom with a dark expression, muttering under his breath that this was not the end. Julian watched him go, strengthening his resolve to protect Matteo no matter the challenges ahead. The legal battle was just beginning, and Julian was more determined than ever to fight for Matteo until the end. Weeks after the judge's decision, Julian found himself deeply saddened, the pain of having to leave Matteo in state care after so much suffering weighing heavily on his heart. He felt more broken with each passing day. When the visitation day finally arrived at the state shelter where Matteo was temporarily housed, he reflected on the criticisms that had started to surface from various quarters. Some colleagues and community members questioned whether his actions had been the most appropriate, pondering the ethics of a teacher taking such an active role in a student's personal life. Upon arriving at the shelter, Julian was greeted by a social worker who accompanied him to the room where Matteo was. The boy seemed calmer, but the sadness was evident in his eyes. "Mr. Julian," Matteo said with a fragile smile when he saw him enter. Julian sat next to Matteo, holding his hand with affection. "How are you, Matteo? I'm doing everything I can so that we can be together again," Julian began, seeking to offer some comfort. Matteo looked down, playing with the edge of his shirt. "I know, sir, I'm afraid I'll never be able to return to school or see you again," the boy confessed, his voice laden with fear and uncertainty. "I am also worried about the children I was teaching. I'm afraid of losing everything," the boy said, his eyes brimming with tears. "Don't think like that, Matteo. I promise I won't stop until you are safe and we can get back to our normal life. You are strong, and together we can face anything. When everything is resolved, we will do something to help the children you were teaching," Julian affirmed, trying to instill a dose of hope in his words. "You are no longer alone," Julian said. Julian spent some time there, playing with the boy, until the social worker interrupted, entering the room to inform them that the visit was almost over. Julian nodded in understanding, but his heart weighed with the idea of leaving Matteo in that place, even temporarily. Before leaving, Julian leaned forward, speaking in a serious and protective tone. "Listen, Matteo. I want you to know that what is happening is not your fault, and you are not alone. I will be here for you no matter what happens." Matteo nodded, tears welling up in his eyes as he hugged Julian quickly. "Thank you, sir. Please don't forget me here," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. Leaving the shelter, Julian felt the responsibility weighing on his shoulders more than ever. He knew the upcoming legal battle would be challenging, but the faith and trust that Matteo placed in him strengthened his resolve. Returning home, he replayed every detail of what needed to be done in the coming days, preparing to fight not just as a teacher, but as someone who had promised to protect Matteo at all costs. Julian left the state shelter with a mix of emotions simmering within him. The determination to protect Matteo was stronger than ever, fueled by the conversation he had just had with the boy. Back at Charles's office, they were preparing to deepen their investigation into Matteo's father, Christopher. "Charles, we need more information about Christopher's background. I'm sure we're not dealing with an isolated case of neglect," Julian said as he settled into the chair in front of the desk, cluttered with papers and dossiers on the case. Charles nodded, already working on the computer to search for old records. "I'll check all previous police and social service reports. I suspect there might be something that was overlooked or unreported before." The following hours were intense. Charles and Julian sifted through a mountain of documents, looking for patterns or previous evidence of abuse that might have been ignored or misinterpreted. With each discovery, the urgency to protect Matteo became clearer. "Julian, look at this," Charles called, pointing to the screen. "There's a report from a neighbor made years ago mentioning frequent screams coming from Christopher's house. It seems it was minimized at the time, considered a family disagreement of no major importance," said the lawyer. Reinvigorated by the discovery, Julian decided they needed to collect more testimonies. They spent the following days visiting Christopher's neighborhood, talking to people who lived nearby and knew the family's dynamics. Many were hesitant to speak, but Julian's seriousness and empathy convinced them to share their observations. One neighbor, an elderly woman who watched everything from her window, revealed that she often saw Matteo playing alone and looking neglected. She said she always thought Matteo needed more attention and felt sorry for the little boy. Each testimony added a layer of complexity to the case, strengthening Julian and Charles's position. They were building a compelling case but knew they would face resistance. As the date for the next hearing approached, a crucial witness emerged, an old friend of Matteo's mother who had direct knowledge of Christopher's aggressive behavior towards his wife before Matteo was born, and how he treated the boy afterward. However, the man hesitated to testify. "I want to help Julian, but I'm afraid of what Christopher might do if he finds out I spoke. He's dangerous," the friend confessed during a tense meeting at a local cafe. Julian placed a hand on the man's shoulder, looking him in the eyes with penetrating sincerity. "Your help could change Matteo's life for the better. I promise we will do everything in our power to protect you," Julian assured, his determination clear in his voice and eyes. The man nodded slowly, the decision to speak seeming less burdensome with each passing moment. "All right, Julian, I'll testify. It's the right thing to do." He finally agreed, his decision bringing new hope to the case. With this confirmation, Julian and Charles left the cafe, feeling one step closer to ensuring Matteo's safety and future. The fight was arduous, but with each step forward, they felt more prepared to face what lay ahead, armed with the truth and supported by justice. As Matteo's custody case became more widely known, media attention began to focus on Julian. Reporters and cameras surrounded the courthouse, eager to capture any developments in the story that had already touched the public due to the severity of the physical abuse against the child. Julian felt the weight of this exposure, worried about the influence it might have on the case. Feeling the eyes of everyone on him, Julian entered the courthouse. The atmosphere was thick with the tension of expectations. The hearing was about to start when Charles approached, a worried expression on his face. "Julian, we have a complication. Christopher is considering offering a deal," Charles revealed, looking over his shoulder to ensure no one else was listening. Julian frowned in surprise. "A deal? What kind of deal?" he asked, curious. The boy's father didn't seem like the type to reconsider his position. He proposes to relinquish full custody in exchange for guaranteeing that Matteo can visit him regularly and continue his education without interruptions. but he wants all charges against him dropped, Charles explained, handing him a document with the proposed terms. Julian pondered for a moment, the conflict evident on his face. The offer could ensure that Matteo was cared for by his own father, someone of his own blood, but at the same time, it didn't guarantee the boy's safety and would let Christopher avoid fully facing the consequences of his actions. This seems more like a way for him to escape justice. I can't in good conscience accept this without considering what's best for Matteo. We need to discuss this with him as well because despite the suffering, it's his father. I want him to know everything, Julian decided. During a recess, Julian and Charles found a moment to speak with Matteo, explaining the situation delicately. Matteo, already quite mature for his age due to the circumstances, listened attentively, his face contemplative. I want you to be my guardian, sir. I don't want to go back to live with that man, even if it means seeing him sometimes. I feel safe with you, said Matteo, his clear statement strengthening Julian's resolve. With Matteo's decision, Julian felt renewed in his purpose. We will reject the deal. We will fight to the end to ensure you have a safe and happy future, Matteo, Julian declared, as Charles nodded, already preparing the documentation to inform the court that they would reject the offer. As they prepared for the next phase of the trial, Julian knew that the coming weeks would be decisive. With the media watching every move and the pressure mounting, he was ready to defend Matteo, no matter the cost. The determination of both was palpable, a bond formed not only by legal circumstances, but by a genuine and deep commitment to Matteo's well-being. Julian sat in front of the large glass window of the courthouse waiting room, the evening sun casting a golden glow over the papers spread out before him. Each document was a reminder of the decisions weighing on his shoulders, especially the settlement offer that Christopher had presented. Matteo, sitting next to him, swung his legs, a clear sign of his anxiety. Mr. Julian, I really need to stay with you. I don't want to go back to my father, Matteo said, his voice firm, although his eyes showed the fear of a possible return to the life he so desperately wanted to leave behind. Julian turned to the boy, his expression softening. I know, Matteo. I'll do everything I can to make sure that happens. We must succeed. But I'm worried that you won't be living with someone from your biological family, someone with your own blood, he explained, sharing his feelings with the boy. Matteo took Julian's hand, squeezing it. I don't care about that. I want to be in a place where I feel loved and safe. With you, I have that. I learned so much from you, more than just books, Matteo replied, his determination clear. Please don't let them take me back, he implored. Inspired by Matteo's courage, Julian felt a wave of determination. I promise I will do my best. We will fight together and ensure you have the future you deserve, Julian affirmed, as a resolute expression took over his face. However, this time the jury seemed undecided. Matteo's father had presented arguments that the boy had to live with someone who shared the same DNA, invalidating that someone from outside could care for the boy as well as someone from the family. The hearing was extended for another day, but Julian felt his fear increasing. Everyone seemed inclined to leave Matteo with Christopher after those arguments, even if the boy would suffer the consequences of living with a family member who mistreated him. Returning to Charles's office to discuss strategy, Julian was firm in his decision. Charles, for his part, prepared the final arguments for the next hearing. We are doing the right thing, Julian. Matteo needs someone to fight for him, and you are that person. Don't be discouraged by those arguments today, Charles said, offering an encouraging smile. However, as soon as Charles announced to Christopher that the agreement was rejected by Julian, the boy's father reacted with fury. During a tense phone call, he threatened Julian, promising to do everything in his power to retain custody of Matteo. You will regret getting into this, Julian. I told you not to interfere in my affairs. That boy will deal with me if he continues supporting you in court, Christopher raged, his voice filled with anger. Julian ended the call, taking a deep breath to maintain his calm. No matter what he says, we will protect Matteo, he told Charles, who noted the threats in a notepad, already thinking about how this could influence the case. In the days that followed, Julian and Charles worked tirelessly, gathering more evidence and preparing for the final confrontation in court. Julian visited Matteo whenever possible, each meeting strengthening their bond and reaffirming their commitment to fight to the end. As the date for the decisive hearing approached, Julian prepared not only for a legal battle, but also to defend his ability to provide Matteo with a safe and loving home. The community began to rally, many openly supporting Julian, touched by his dedication and concern for Matteo's well-being. The courtroom was electrically charged with tension as everyone prepared for the final hearing in Matteo's custody case. Julian, alongside Charles, adjusted his papers, his serious and focused expression reflecting the gravity of the moment. "This is the day, Julian. This is where everything we've worked for will be put to the test," Charles whispered, giving one last look at the documents before handing them to the judge. Julian nodded, taking a deep breath to maintain his calm. When the judge entered, a respectful silence filled the room. Julian stood, ready to make his final argument. "Your Honor, we are here today not only to discuss the custody of a boy, but to decide on his future and well-being," Julian began, his firm and clear voice echoing through the room. "Matteo has been subjected to situations no child should face. Abuse, neglect, fear. He lived through all of that. I stepped in not only as his teacher, but as someone who deeply cares for him. I'm here not out of obligation, but out of a commitment to Matteo's safety and happiness," Julian continued, as attentive eyes followed him. Christopher, visibly shaken by Julian's words, tried to maintain his composure. His lawyer prepared to counter, insisting on the importance of biological ties and accusing Julian of overstepping his responsibilities. Mr. Christopher's argument focuses on biological ties, but are these ties enough to keep Matteo in a place where he has suffered so much? I ask the court, what is more important, blood ties or a loving and safe environment? Charles questioned, supporting Julian's position. Matteo, sitting at the back of the room, watched everything with anxious eyes. When called to testify, he walked to the stand with hesitant steps. I just want to stay where I feel safe. Mr. Julian showed me what it means to have someone who truly cares. To me, a father is someone who does that, who takes care of me like he did," Matteo said, his voice almost a whisper, then looked at Julian. "Thank you for being my teacher and my father when I needed it. No matter what they decide here, to me, my father is you," he said, with tears running down his face. Julian felt his heart melt, wanting to go to the boy and say everything would be all right, but not wanting to give false hopes. He said, "I also consider you my son, Matteo," from a distance. After Matteo's testimony, the judge called for a brief recess before making his decision. The courthouse corridor was abuzz with conversations about the possible outcome. Julian, surrounded by support from colleagues and some parents of students, felt a mix of hope and nervousness. Finally, everyone was called back into the room. The judge, with a serious expression, began to read his final decision. "Considering all the testimonies and evidence presented, we have reached a conclusion," he said, pausing for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. The heavy silence filled the courtroom as everyone awaited the judge's decision. Matteo sat next to Julian and held his hand. Julian's gaze was fixed on the judge, whose serious expression gave little indication of his verdict. "We are here to announce a crucial decision," the judge began, his voice reverberating through the room. "This case presented us with unique challenges and provoked deep discussions about what truly constitutes the best interest of the child." Julian felt a knot form in his stomach. Next to him, Matteo seemed to hold his breath, his eyes fixed on the judge, waiting for the words that would decide his future. After careful deliberation and consideration of all testimonies and evidence presented, the judge continued, pausing for a moment to look directly at Matteo, who slightly shrank under the judge's gaze. "It has been decided to grant full custody of Matteo to Mr. Julian, thus ensuring the safety and well-being of the child." A sigh of relief escaped Julian, his emotions a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Next to him, Matteo exhaled the breath he seemed to have been holding for eternity, a smile beginning to form on his face. "However," the judge added, causing the tension to briefly return, "this decision comes with a clear understanding of the challenges ahead. Mr. Julian, by taking on the responsibility for Matteo's well-being, you will face trials that require commitment and continuous adaptation. We expect you to continue providing an environment that not only ensures Matteo's safety, but also supports his development and education." Julian nodded with understanding and determination. "I am prepared to do whatever is necessary to support Matteo, now and in the future," he replied, his firm voice conveying his unwavering commitment. Matteo, hearing the judge's and Julian's words, finally allowed tears of relief and happiness to roll down his cheeks. "Thank you, sir," he murmured, squeezing Julian's hand once more. As the hearing dispersed, many approached to congratulate Julian, touched by the dedication and love he had shown throughout the process. Outside the courthouse, the press waited, but Julian was focused only on Matteo, promising him quietly, "Nothing will separate us again, Matteo. We will build a new life together." Julian's promise was not only to Matteo, but also to himself, reaffirming his role not only as an educator, but as a legal guardian. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but also opportunities to grow and learn together. Walking out of the courthouse under the darkening sky, Julian and Matteo felt more than just victorious, they felt renewed. With each other's support, they were ready to face whatever the future brought, confident that justice and love would prevail. The morning light filtered through the curtains of the house where Julian and Matteo now lived. The new life began with a shared morning routine, preparing breakfast while discussing plans for the day. "Matteo, how about after school we go see that space I mentioned? It could be a great place to start our project," Julian suggested, serving pancakes at the table. Matteo, now more adapted to his new life and visibly happier, nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I want to help other children like you helped me. I think we can make a difference, sir," he said, using the title with a smile. For now, Julian was much more than that. As they ate, Julian reflected on the logistical and financial challenges they would face. "We will need volunteers and donations, but first we need a solid plan to present to the community and potential sponsors," he explained, always the educator, even outside the classroom. After school, they visited the potential space for the project, an old neighborhood warehouse that could be transformed into a community learning center, where children like those Matteo had taught could learn for free. As they entered the place, Matteo looked around, his eyes shining with possibilities. "We could have a reading area here, and maybe tables for art classes there," he said, planning aloud, a gesture that brought a proud smile to Julian's face. "The children I used to teach won't believe it when they see all this," he said. Back home, while Matteo did his homework, Julian sat down to write funding proposals. The task was arduous, but the motivation to do something meaningful for the community drove him. "I need to help other children," said the teacher. In the middle of his writing, the phone rang. It was Charles, his lawyer, with news about Christopher. "Julian, I just received a call from the prosecutor regarding Matteo's case. The jury decided to apply a legal penalty against Christopher for abuse and neglect. He is already facing justice," Charles informed. The relief and resolution this news brought were palpable. Julian explained the situation to Matteo, who listened attentively. "Does this mean he can't hurt me again?" Matteo asked, insecurity still a shadow in his young eyes. "Exactly, Matteo, and we are here together, safe and moving forward. You will never have to face this alone again," Julian assured, giving him a comforting hug. "I will not allow anyone to hurt you, ever. But if after serving his sentence your father has changed, we can find a legal way for you to keep in touch if you want and if it's safe. The important thing is that you are cared for and know that you can always count on me," said the teacher. That night, as Matteo slept, Julian stayed awake, contemplating the moon through the window. The coming weeks would be crucial, not only to consolidate his project with Matteo, but also to ensure that the shadow of the past did not threaten their future. He felt an iron determination to protect the new life they were building, a life based on love, safety, and education. Julian hoped that one day Christopher would change and that forgiveness would happen between them. But the most important thing is that the boy was now safe and would remain so. Now he would continue the project started by Matteo in his community, expanding the project and taking measures so that no child was left without studying. "I'm going to help those children, just like Matteo," he murmured to himself, a plan forming in his mind. The fight had been long, and although there were still challenges ahead, Julian knew that every small effort was worth it to ensure no other child suffered as Matteo had. 3 years later, the change in Matteo's and Julian's lives triggered an even greater transformation. Inspired by their journey, a new law was passed, allowing teachers like Julian to have a more active role in protecting children from mistreatment. This legal measure recognized the importance of early intervention by educators in situations of child abuse, providing them with tools and authority to act in partnership with police and social services. The project initiated by Julian and Matteo had flourished, becoming an educational movement that now welcomed hundreds of children, offering them not only education but a safe haven. Matteo, now a teenager, walked through the center's corridors with gentle authority, helping wherever he could and showing particular interest in following in Julian's footsteps. "One day I want to be a teacher like you, Dad," he said to Julian one sunny afternoon while organizing books in the library. "I want to make a difference. I want to give children what you gave me. A chance," said the teenager. Julian looked at Matteo with a mix of pride and emotion. "You are already making a difference, Matteo," he replied, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, "and I have no doubt you will be an excellent teacher." With the project's success, Julian and Matteo had become examples of how compassion and education can transform lives. Their journey, though full of challenges, proved to be a powerful force for good. They not only changed their own lives but also impacted the community and society in a way that would continue to resonate for many years. With every child who passed through the project, a new chapter of hope began, built on the solid foundation of love, education, and the unwavering commitment to protect each young person who walked through their doors. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We greatly appreciate having you here with us. Now you can click on the links appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, full of valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.